Hey, everybody, welcome back to Pro AV today. One of the markets that's been the most exciting to see AV's growth into is really that security, defense, and kind of that emergency response system, like control rooms and command centers and things like that. Because you look at that market, and it's very easy to think of maybe NASA control room in the '60s, or even this massive broadcast control room that you'd see at a major broadcast station. But really the sweet spot now is kind of that middle to upper middle market. As technology prices have gotten lower, and accessibility has become very much more important in our AV communities. You've seen a lot of these middle market companies, organizations, things like that have access to it. And if you watched the last episode that we did with Dan Gundry and Brett Leimer, talked a little bit more about the infrastructure and design process, but this one's going to be focused a little bit more on the technology. So figured I'd bring in the best expert I know. That's Scott Norder over at RGB Spectrum. Scott, thanks so much for hopping on the show.
Okay, it's great to be here. I'm excited about the topics for today.
Well, Scott, thanks again for coming on. And one of the great things about your experience, Scott, is that you've been really laser focused kind of on the engineering and operations side of AV. And what's interesting is, as we talk about maybe some of the accessibility, whether it's price points, whatever, that middle market to upper middle market is a place really now that you're seeing a lot of incredible technology being implemented. Talk to me a little bit about some of the things really that have made that market specifically ripe for security purposes.
Oh, absolutely. And I think what's interesting about our perspective here at RGB Spectrum is that we really are the power behind all the pixels. With the cost of displays becoming lower and lower and more affordable to that middle market that you're referring to, there's more of a need to be able to drive it with a common operating system. And that's what really we are. We're the guts. So our perspective on the middle market is there's a lot of content that's coming to play in these middle market security operation centers, whether they're in police departments or county emergency centers or airport control, land or airside. There's a proliferation of these control centers that really are becoming showcases, and the content that's being driven into them is exploding. It's cloud-based content, it's web dashboards, it's broadcast, it's private video, it's personal apps, and then there's an expectation that it's connected so that you can get both mobile content in and that content that's in that control center all the way out to the mobile users. So we're really just seeing an explosion of the content, and that really drives a need for amalgamating all that content on display screens in these control centers.
Well, what's interesting, and this is one of the things too that actually you and I had a chance to talk about before the show, is that really the demands of each industry and application look a little bit different, right? Maybe in a school setting, there's a lot more application for cloud, or maybe in like a casino setting, there's a lot more need for modularity, things like that. But what's exciting, I think, about this market specifically is that it allows us as a communities really to touch a lot of different places that we may not have been before. A lot of the same trends that you're seeing with UCC, where AV is now being implemented, across verticals that maybe even never even were thinking about it. What are some of those markets that jump out to you is maybe some of those newer ones that excite you?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a significant increase in the spending on high-profile display walls in security centers and public safety, even all the way down to the desktop. So being able to have operators in, for instance, San Francisco Police Department who are connected in a way that they've not been before, where they're looking at content on the screen. They need broadcast, because often broadcast is the first group of people with live video on the scene. They want to pull that into the command center, and then they want to be able to push that out to their mobile users, the police officers and the fire department who are on site, and they get their content on their phone directly from the control center. So that's something that's really kind of new and exciting, to be able to have that multi-domain collection of content both in and out. And then we're seeing, and I mentioned, airports are places where security has always been paramount ever since, 9/11, it really ramped up. But now with the implementation of new IT-based technologies, to be able to take all the content that's available and bring it into that command center and be able to provide live responses to anything that might be happening on the grounds is really pretty exciting. So we're seeing a lot of growth in those areas. the more that COVID impacted everyone, the more technology for screening showed up for temperature, and we're seeing sensor data show up in control rooms in ways that never happened pre-COVID. So all kinds of new trends that are exciting from a technology perspective in this area. And as you point out, it just keeps going on and on. When you look at defense and aerospace, there's need there to bring in and train more employees because there's been big turnover. So you want to train more people to drive the fuel trucks at the airport. You want to train more people to drive buses, and that training requires technology. And then you want to be able to monitor performance in the real world, and make sure that your operations are safe. So those are all great trends that we're seeing today.
Well, really, from a technology standpoint, the one thing, as you talk about that jumps out is this idea of scalability and accessibility, right? Whether it's you have different inputs coming in, whether that's sensor data, like you mentioned, maybe it's as simple as broadcast TV, things like that. And, that has to inform really the product design process, right? Because it's not it's not as simple as, plugging in a BNC connector and an SDI cable and hoping for the best anymore now, right? I mean, you talked about some of those cloud applications and some of the needs, whether it's a software implementation or even a hardware implementation. How does that scalability and maybe how does some of those newer markets really inform not only you guys but holistically the industry's really product design process?
Oh, absolutely. And I think the AV industry specifically has no real reason to reinvent the wheel. The IT world has dealt with scalability for decades now, and I think the AV industry is certainly doing a good job of learning from that. And there's more that we can do. Clearly, cloud solutions are built to be scalable, and by incorporating cloud technologies into your product portfolio, as a manufacturer, you can extend your scalability just naturally. Adopting internet technologies, simple things like DHCP, so that you are getting, the right content in the right place with, self-discovery and all the kinds of features that allow for scalability to be natural in your solution. These are things that the AV industry is adopting rapidly. So, I think scalability is not just a requirement that you check off. Scalability is something you got to learn. You got to live it, and then you got to deliver it and prove it. So, I think companies are doing that at a much greater degree in the AV industry than they used to, 5-10 years ago.
Well, and what's interesting too about those IT communities, really, that you mentioned that have done a good job of really building out kind of that distribution workflow. The IT communities typically um, have to deal with what I'll call users that may not be traditional AV users, right? Whether that's all the way up to the CEO, all the way down to someone just trying to come in and book a meeting or move a screen around, and especially when you look at command control rooms, somebody who's got to reorganize entire interfaces, somebody who's got to bring in new data points, things like that, and it's interesting because that's been one of our biggest challenges as an AV community, is realizing really that our end users are, in a lot of cases, entirely different people who have entirely different UX and UI expectations. Talk about that a little bit. I mean, not necessarily from a product standpoint, but as a company, how are you dealing with that? Really having to almost be prescriptive and proactive before you could get any feedback from the user.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. User interface design is so critical. When you presume that your users are very well trained, you may be making a mistake. That
right.
presumption,
Unfortunately,
can prevent your success in the marketplace. So, you really do have to pay a lot of attention to making sure that you look at the workflow of the actual end user of your product in their environment, and that's so critical in control rooms, to recognize that the operators who are in the control room, who are most interactive with your technology, generally have a massive turnover, and they are generally not considered well trained. So you have to provide very simple yet customizable interfaces so that the management of that facility can define at a very tactical level the interactions that the operators have with your technology. And that's something that we learned the hard way, but we've been very customizable over our history. But you really do have to focus on the workflow, and the where the rubber meets the road is making the operator's experience very streamlined and efficient. You want to use that experience to minimize mistakes that they might make, because they're dealing with event management, and mistakes in event management can cost lives, and you want to avoid that. So we take that duty very seriously, and definitely believe in defining, simple to use but effective user interfaces.
Well, Scott, one of the things you brought up briefly earlier in the conversation was that, a lot of these control rooms have become showpieces, right? They're, whether it's from a nice, flashy, giant multi-view wall, all the way to integrated design and aesthetic, right? Where you're seeing operators really in stadium seating type environments where, they've got incredible desks and there's lots of aesthetically pleasing things happening. But, I'm curious, as, somebody who sees and has these conversations on a pretty regular basis, how do you see that impacting the industry, right? As an industry, typically we are very technical and very hardware focused. And one of the things we've struggled historically to get into is a little bit more of that aesthetic side. Talk about how that really informs some of the decision making and maybe some of the prescriptive and proactive approaches that you guys have.
Yeah, certainly the largest jobs, you've got a team of architects and designers who are really making sure that a facility is beautiful. And what better way, if you're a global 2000 company, to prove that you manage your assets well, whether they be, rolling stock in transportation, or power distribution in a utility company like PG&E here in the Bay Area, or any other of the large entities, to have a great room to show that you manage those assets well. And I think what we're seeing from a technology standpoint is making sure that you support the aesthetics of the room by minimizing the technology that's actually in the room. So, again, implementing IT technologies so that the servers are in a well-managed closet and the operators have just the equipment that they need directly in front of them, and that the screens are clear sight lines, and that the local desktops do not impede the view from, to the larger wall. Those are all things that we see happening on a pretty regular basis. And as an IT provider, a technology provider, an AV technology provider, you really have the same common concern. How do I make sure that experience for the operator and for the management of the room is as good as it possibly can be? And think about when you bring a visitor in, what are they going to see? Are they going to see people who are confused, or are they going to see people who are doing their job and managing assets? And that's really what you want to see, is people who are doing their job and managing their assets.
Scott, I appreciate that answer. Honestly, it's something that we continually strive for as a community, to find a way to bridge those gaps between the aesthetic really and the functionality of the technology. So I love your perspective on it, and you're right. Especially as we kind of creep into that middle market, it's something that people may not have at the forefront of their mind. So the more that we can be really proactive in our conversations, I think the better. But Scott, I'll give you the last word here and let you pull out the crystal ball. What excites you most, maybe from a technology standpoint or even an industry standpoint, coming up through the next 10 years, specifically in really that security and defense market?
Interestingly, it's a problem, but it still excites me, and it's the problem of privacy. The landscape is pretty much the Wild West, and the state of Illinois has a law, the Biometric Information Protection Act, which is causing a lot of tech companies some issues, where it governs how private companies can use biometric data and the terms by which you can do it and how you can reuse that information for other purposes. That's kind of a unique situation, and it's one that I expect to span across the United States and other areas. So when you're deploying camera technologies in a security operations center, you will have to think about, how do we deal with what we store of the people who cross our cameras? And how do we protect that, and how do we assure them that information is going to be used correctly? I think that's a whole new fun opportunity for everybody in the AV industry to kind of jump into that and make sure we all understand it and be experts in it. And I'd say another area that really excites me is sustainability. One of my side projects has been to help Avixa launch a sustainability task force to help manufacturers, integrators, architects, all stakeholders in AV solutions look at how we build more sustainable solutions so that they last longer, they're easier to support, and they have less waste, because obviously we want to save our planet. And that's the reason that's so important. So those are two things that really excite me about where this industry is going to go.
Ladies and gentlemen, Scott Norder from RGB Spectrum. I don't know if you could put it in a more concise ways than that, or a concise place than that. The sustainability talk got me going on the waste mindset. But Scott, hey, thanks so much for coming on today. We're looking forward to seeing not only the great things happening over on the hardware side with RGB, but really keep us up to date with some of those sustainability initiatives. We'd love to have you back on the show.
Absolutely. I really appreciate it today. Thanks a lot.
And thank you guys for watching. Be sure to tune in next time.